Welcome back to Sunday edition here on KTN News. Now, it is exactly this week, 1 year since the 2017 general election. A lot has happened in the last 12 months. There was an election, there was an annulled election on the 1st of September by the Supreme Court. There was a repeat presidential poll on the 26th of October, which was boycotted by the National Super Alliance. President Uhuru Kenyatta won the election. He was sworn in. There were street protests. So a number of Kenyans lost their lives. There was the self-oathing of the NASA leader on the 30th of January. And then there was a handshake. A lot has happened. Dismas, from where you sit, do you think these two gentlemen, Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta, have been valued for their words, their promises they made in the run-up to the elections? Remember, Raila Odinga and his NASA team had their manifesto. They had what they had promised to Kenyans. Do you think Uhuru Kenyatta has done his promises justice? And then during the protest, there was irreducible minimums that Raila Odinga insists have been carved into that document for the handshake. In the overall state of that picture, where do you think we are?
Well, in my view, really, the biggest issue affecting Kenya is IBC, our electoral body. Because when you go to vote, you don't know whether it's actually your vote which counts,
right,
or IBC which is going to count. And, you know, we've been told that elections in Kenya are marked by illegalities and irregularities. We've not been able to clean that. And I think that is our biggest challenge. Because in Kenya, we've got amazing talent that you can elect to the National Assembly or Senate or the presidency, and you'll be able to take Kenya to the next level. But you see now, Mura or Wanjiko or Nafula is no longer sure that if you go to the ballot box and you cast your ballot, whether your ballot is going to count. Now, part of the reason why you have our MPs and leaders behaving in a manner which is unacceptable is because they know they are not accountable to the voters. They know that probably they used some resources to buy those votes. And in my view, what President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga need to do, because they have the handshake, is to make sure that we clean our electoral system, that when we go to vote, your vote counts. Then number two, we shouldn't be getting into political tension every 5 years. That as we are approaching an election, investors are running away, people are becoming nervous.
Do you think that the two gentlemen will be able to sort IBC? Because it's a very big issue for you.
Yes, in my view, again, part of in our political trajectory, for some reason we place too much faith in personalities. Right now, everybody is looking at President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga to sort out IBC. And that's the reason a number of us opposed to the handshake, the way it was structured, right from the word go. There are Raila's word and President Kenyatta's word carry.
Right.
Why can't we have this handshake in a structured manner that it carries the interest of all Kenyans? Because we know for a fact, if you're going to have a handshake and it only remains top, if folks at the grassroots level are not acceptable, we are not making progress. We've not been told that that group of wise men have been doing meetings, and understand one of their key concerns is going to be corruption. But I hope they're talking about corruption at IBC, not the general corruption. Because you see, people are now saying in 2022 they're not going to vote, and others are saying we are going to vote because tunaenda kulipa deni. But you know, we should be given the opportunity to vote our conscience. We shouldn't be voting because we are wondering what is the neighbor thinking of. And we shouldn't be voting because we are afraid somebody is going to burn your house. And when we vote, we are supposed to vote knowing that your vote is going to carry the day, not any other thing.
All right, Mark, let's talk about the government. Do you think this handshake, the state of things that they are, what has happened has happened? First of all, should Kenyans be told, you know, to move on? Let's talk about the handshake. This is how it looks like. Forget about what happened. Forget about the grievances that you had, if you had. Should they be told, move on to what's happening currently? And number two, do you think, what is the value of the handshake for Kenyans? As Raila Odinga's promises to his people been factored into this? And should that be done through an inclusive government by the president? How should this work?
Ben, that has to be understood in the light of two historical facts. and move on was the a slogan that dominated the post-2013 period. It was basically in Swahili telling the people for an alliance other than Jubilee Mtadu. That was the idea. And for 5 years, we paid the price of having two countries running throughout that 5 years. Small wonder that people like Devin Dees, shortly after the 2017 elections, started declaring a Republic of Kenya versus the People's Republic of Kenya, simply because the idea of a duality in this nation was quite real then. So telling people to just move on at this point is not and cannot be an option. At the same time, we have to remember that historically during Mwai Kibaki's time, we had this magical moment in Kenya where people seated in a matatu would arrest a policeman for asking for a bribe. We had the golden year where Kenya was voted the most optimistic country in the world. In short order, we had about Anglo-leasing, which we've never sold to this day. And if you notice the psyche of the Kenyan, every Kenyan decided in their hearts that what I will do is, instead of fighting, I will wait for my turn to eat. And true to that sentiment, every succession of leadership has created an opportunity for themselves to eat, landing us where we are. The handshake, now bringing all these two factors into present day reality, the handshake has done two things. Number one, it has given President Uhuru Kenyatta an opportunity to lead this country implement his development agenda. Kalonzo Musyoka's support of Big Four, Raila Odinga's support of Big Four, Mudavadi's lack of offense at Big Four, and Wetangula, of course, is just crying somewhere in a corner. But you can see the serious politicians in this country agreeing by and large with the Big Four agenda. So the president has an opportunity to roll out his agenda without issue. But at the same time, there are the soft issues of this country that needs to be dealt with. The handshake has created a platform where, for once, when a certain person from a certain tribe is taken to court, the tribe at home is not at war, saying our tribe is being fought. So the opportunity to not only recover economically and structurally, but to also deal with our soft issues. What needs to happen urgently, though, is the seriousness and the gravitas of this particular handshake, and the promises these leaders gave to people need not only to be institutionalized, they need to become the identity of Kenyans. Kenyans need to feel it with such strength, vim, and vigor that we are convinced that the president is actually going to do the Big Four. We need to be so convinced that in 2022 our supermarkets will still have stock, because Kenyans will not panic in buying rice and beans for a rainy day. So what needs to happen is beyond institutionalization. It needs to become the DNA and the fabric of every Kenyan. If they fail to do that, then we will end up with a Kibaki in 2007 situation where the people are so downhearted. Let me tell you, the fight against corruption is part of the reason we had post-election violence, because people had lost hope. No one will shed blood unless hope has ended. And today we have some hope. We must kindle that flame and make sure that that hope lasts past 2022.
All right. Husband, speaking during or just after that handshake, your member of parliament, who is also the minority whip in the National Assembly, Junet Mohammed, said that a lot of progress has happened in this country, and the biggest achievement has been the handshake, and a lot of promises were made. Do you agree with that, first of all? And do you think the things that were thrashed out in that handshake, which is supposed to be the biggest thing that has happened in this country for months, have happened? First of all, there's compensation of victims of post-2017 election victims, those who lost loved ones and property in that. And then the issue of electoral justice, it was one of the biggest issues that NASA had put as a must-have for them to have any kind of dialogue.
Yeah, on the first question, I must say that I agree with Honorable Junaid Mohammed that the handshake has actually brought to the fore an environment that will make it possible to achieve many of the other things that on the one hand NASA stood for, and then on the other hand Jubilee was very, very hesitant to listen to. And then they were brought on a document called the Building Bridges document. So I would say that since that handshake, you know, we've seen some stability, and what we are looking at is how then do we progress from there? How do we have these victims compensated? How do we have issues like the death of Msando addressed? And then in the long run, how then do we have, you know, an electoral process that is anchored on a very solid legal framework that would ensure that the vote that we cast on the voting day counts all the way to the tallying. I would say that, you know, that is a long-term thing, and I think the handshake provides for that. And then secondly, you also realize that most Kenyans, the idea of accept and move on, the idea of utadu is actually anchored on a liberal kind of democracy, where the law says that you get 50+1 and you move on, without any realization that Kenya as a country cannot domesticate liberal democracy. Because when people give the elected leaders the power to lead, there's a way in which we are doing it along ethnic lines. And therefore, that person who gets 50+1 is only getting 50+1 from a section of the country. And chances are the other section of the country is this. Then we have this duality of the Republic of Kenya and the People's Republic. And I want to believe that that should be the main concern of the handshake. And if you look at the Building Bridges whole idea, it is actually taking us away from that liberal approach that is anchored on the law first to a deliberative and participatory kind of democracy, because now people are beginning to have dialogue on issues. And moving from that deliberative approach, then you can anchor everything that now people will understand to be democratic on a legal framework. And just to buttress the argument that Dismas was making, that electoral reforms should remain at the core of this Building Bridges and the Handshake initiative. Because then without that, we will have the big four sorted, but after the 2022 general election, we might again come back to where we are in terms of having this post-election kind of chaos. So how do we then move to the electoral reforms? The Building Bridges should sensitize the Kenyans on the need to understand that if we have serious reforms and every other political player in the party plays his part in ensuring that the vote of any other Kenyan who goes to vote counts, then all these other things, corruption, development, will just fit in place. Because when the reform is such that if I vote, my vote will count,
all right,
any politician will understand that I have the power. And if they don't do that, that benefits the common mwananchi, the elections are not held once and they lead forever, there will be another election. So that realization that politicians will have that the people have the power through the vote, which cannot be tampered by the electoral body, I think it will rain on the politicians and they will know that they are answerable to the public.
All right. Kipchumba, the promises Raila had in this MOU, in this thing, whether it's from the manifesto in 2017 and those demands, the release of minimums, those things that he wants to achieve for Kenyans, and what President Uhuru Kenyatta wants to achieve for Kenyans, his legacy, can those two things, do you think they are going hand in hand? Do you think they can be on the same basket?
Ben, first of all, maybe to correct an insertion given by Huila, that about liberal democracy and participatory tangent of it. In liberal democracy itself thrives from the participatory and responsive viewpoint of that model. You cannot have a liberal democracy when you do not have a participatory point, because it is from there. One ushers in the other. You cannot separate the two. And I'll refer.
Do you agree to be
I'll refer. No, I'll give him the exact text. I'll give him the exact text.
Let me just say that
let me
liberal
guide
is
you.
anchored in the law.
Let me
That's
guide you.
it.
Let me guide you to finish it.
Yes.
I'll refer him to Dambisa Moyo, winner take it all. He can interact with it and he'll appreciate whatever I'm saying. Back to your question. You asked about what Raila told us, his promises, what Uhuru Kenyatta promised people, and whether they'll deliver and how they fit into each other. First of all, at times, listening to Raila Odinga, the politician, and listening to Raila Odinga after handshake, I get confused. The Raila Odinga before handshake had a spirit, the irreducible minimum. While I might not have agreed with everything in that irreducible minimum document, but there were very valid issues that, apart from the Building Bridges initiative, we need to work on those issues as we move forward. One issue is the issues of electoral reforms, the issues of human rights. Those are issues that we do not need to wait for the Council of Elders under the Building Bridges to come up. And Uhuru Kenyatta, as the president, he has the best opportunity moment any president in history of this country has had. There is no noise from the opposition. There is no hindrance from anywhere. He can do that without much ado. Secondly, about fixing IBC, I think at times as a nation we behave like pigs. The moment we have whatever we are looking for, we forget what were our problems. 1 year ago, our problem was IBC, a dysfunctional IBC. To this moment, now that we have leaders in office and everybody has walked their way, we are not addressing the issue. And come 2022, we will look like people who came from another planet, who arrived here, and we want to fix IBC. No, this country must operate like a human anatomy, where your eyes can see while your heart is pumping blood. Why are we behaving like people who are closed in a vacuum? That we only do one thing at a time. Secondly, after 1 year later, there are things that have been done and continue being done. A democracy in itself is like growth. You are never full until you die. We cannot hope, sit here and say that everything has been done. No, that is why we continuously change diapers and everything that look like it, because leadership in itself is not an end in itself, but a means to an end. Uhuru Kenyatta has tried the big four. We have seen the deputy president launching projects here and there as promised by Jubilee. We are in the right direction, but there are other things that must be addressed. The economy of this country is in the wrong place. The taxation, we are among the highly taxed people in this part of the region.
Right.
The issues of the rule of law, we can say the president and his deputy and the leadership, they are doing the right thing. We can see now the big fish leaving the ocean, coming to the pond that is a prison, and we can see things working.
Right.
The rule of law, we are doing well, but in terms of the economy,
yes,
Mama Mboga at home cannot feel it.
All right. There are so many issues to talk about. Let me just go through one more in the like 3 minutes that we have, mentioning the things that we're asking if they can fit with each other. There was an issue that was closely tied to these issues of compensation and electoral justice, and that the issue of the talk to alter the constitution, that the two gentlemen, Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta, seem to read from very different scripts. The president saying he has no time for that. Raila Odinga blowing hot and cold on the same issue. Do you think this must very quickly that we are going to see this being implemented by that Building Bridges team, or was it shot dead in the water?
Well, the president and Raila Odinga understand that over the last 2 weeks they've been having conversations with the Building Bridges initiative. And I'm hoping that when they open up their space to the public,
yes,
then they'll get independent views. And you know, those guys who are building those bridges, they need to consult with the stakeholders. It needs to be structured. And if they do that, they'll understand that Kenya, where we sit today, what is going to make progress is a parliamentary democracy. And all over the world, the most stable economies have got parliamentary democracies. That's where every person feels represented. And in my view, if you're able to get a parliamentary democracy coming to Kenya in the manner and fashion it's practiced in South Africa, that when I go to cast my ballot, I'm not voting for a particular individual, but I'm voting for a particular party. Say, if I'm going to cast my ballot, I'm going to vote for NASA, or I'm going to vote for Jubilee. So that when you elect people, they go to the National Assembly. In fact, they are members of the National Assembly. They represent national interest. At that stage, you'll be in a good place. And then number two, The same political parties then will come up with manifestos that are driven by the people. Right now, the manifestos are done by folks referred to as Cambridge Analytica all over the world, and they do not even understand what is happening in Kenya. So we need to have political parties that come with manifestos which start from a village in Mosocho. So these guys, when they go to the National Assembly, they're passing those budgets to build roads as envisioned by a baraza held in Mosocho. But right now, you see leaders launching projects all over, you begin to wonder, was there people participation? Now, when you're able to do that, then somebody will not be worried that if I lose the election, I'm going back to the village. Because part of the reason why politicians in Kenya shed tears and slide into depression after they lose an election is they'll not be beneficiaries of corruption. Right now, we've been told by Obala here that if you're a member of the National Assembly in a particular committee, you've got a welfare chair, whose purpose is to go seek money from these billionaires. So outside the salary you are paid of 1 million per month, there's a chance that every day you'll be going home with 20 million. But when you have a strong parliamentary democracy, like in South Africa,
right,
if Zuma does a mistake, the party will call him up and ask him to go home.
All right.
Yeah.
What do you think, Mark? Should the constitution be changed, and in what manner?
The question I ask myself consistently is, we have a very clear Vision 2030. We have a very unclear Citizen 2030. When we built Thika Road and put 6 lanes of it, Kenyans were very happy to risk their lives jumping across 6 lanes and sometimes 12 lanes, because that is how Kenyans act. We are a society that likes to self-mutilate. Example, we have one of the strongest procurement systems in the world by the name of IFMIS, okay? IFMIS today, I'm told, that if you wanted to find out how much money was disbursed to Dismas Mokua's company so that he can build a palace in Mosocho, you can do it in a single instant. However, that same system, which has worked wonders in India, somehow in Kenya completely fails when it is faced with wheelbarrows worth 100,000, towels worth 10,000 shillings, and is supplied, telling you that the biggest problem with this country is not that we lack good laws, it is that we have citizenry that have no self-respect, no self-dignity. And I'll give you an example. Kenyans a week ago were complaining about a certain supermarket being racist. Today, you will find Kenyans in the same supermarket. A few days ago, Kenyans were told to collectively go to hell. Today, you will find Kenyans saying he meant we should go to Hell's Gate. Let me tell you, Kenyans behave like people who like our kidnappers. You know those people, we used to call them house slaves.
Yes.
If you watched a cartoon called Boondocks, there was a guy called Uncle Ruckus who used to always praise the slave owner. That is what Kenyans have become.
All right,
we are in love with our captors.
Husband, 30 seconds only.
Well, I think there is need. It doesn't matter what the two principals who shook hands think. I think the most important thing is what works for Kenya. If the president does not feel like the constitution should be touched and the prime minister feels, we should be asking ourselves, is there a need? From where I see it, the biggest need we have is the governance structure. That we have poll losers, but we have individuals who are given power to govern. We need to find a way of accommodating individuals who are given substantive power, even though they don't get the threshold to go to State House. I think the United States of America did that when they had the same crisis in the 1920s. They came up with the midterm elections, and their democracy is a lot more mature compared to ours. So just like Mark is saying, there is need to look at the law based on an understanding of Kenyans, that we just need to understand Kenyans and the things that divide us during elections. And if there's a way we can tweak the law, so be it.
All right, Kipchumba, change the constitution or not?
I think, Ben, our immediate problem is not the law.
Okay.
Our immediate problem is leadership. What has the constitution to do with members of parliament and seeking in parliament? Zero.
So not a priority.
What has the constitution to do with members of Nyamira County Assembly using toilet paper per day? Zero. What has the constitution got to do with us paying at the pump 112 shillings per litre, while Uganda, which is inland, pays 90 6 shillings. What has the constitution got to do with that? We got to do what we got to do by doing this. We are Kenyans. We need to just get one thing done.
Right.
We need to fix our leadership. Secondly, this thing of saying we sort a constitution anytime there's a problem, we need to ask ourselves, are we a democracy or a monarch or a protectionist model of leadership? What are we? Because we cannot be funding IBC at 22 billion every election and come back and ask ourselves, when people lose election, what are we doing with them? What we need to do is fund a department in IBC for counseling and psychology, so that when Kipchumba loses an election, he is counseled and given psychological treatment, so that we are not subjected to this. Secondly, if today we change the constitution, if today we change this constitution and we bring in our prime minister, as most people know, tomorrow there will be another chastisement of a small population. Will we now bring in a supreme leader or a country leader? It is like just Iran. A circus.
All right, let's leave it there. A few of your comments. Bunga Brand says, I personally fear this handshake. Kenya losers at the end. No one checks the government anymore. This gives a proper condition for theft. Ferdinand Mukos says, all bowed to the demigod who appeared before them for probing. It was such a sad situation to a common mwananchi, referring to the sugar probe. One here from Ambrose Mokayo says, Sunday edition, politicians should come out and tell us who altered the reports. Watching from Kisii, probably watching from Mosocho. Victor says, those are not MPs. Those are frauds and crooks who have no humanity at all. For years, they have only used and duped their voters. And Bernard Koech says, do these MPs live forever? Why don't they try to leave a legacy just once? Keep those texts and tweets. The hashtag is KTN Sunday edition. Let's take another quick break here on the program. When we come back, we'll have the final thoughts on this conversation vis-a-vis President Uhuru Kenyatta's dilemma in that cabinet reshuffle that has been looming over his deputy, William Ruto, and his handshake partner, Raila Amolo Odinga. Don't go too far.